Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Good for Business, Business for Good. This is a Tricordant network event. My name is Nick Richmond. I'm one of the Tricordant directors, and I'm joined by my team, John, Alistair, Graham, and our amazing client, Claudia Adriani. We run these events on a regular basis so we can learn together to share and explore a provocative topic, idea, or maybe a case study as part of our network. And although we've shifted a lot of our events online, this is the first one first of the network events that we're running online. So the basic agenda, as you see it there, is beginning to the welcome. We're going to just touch on ground rules in a moment. And then I'm going to share a bit about why organizational health matters and why it's so important to Tricordant. We'll hand over to Claudia then to share about the case study that we supported her with over the past year. And then there'll be a chance for everyone in small groups to really get to know each other a bit more, to explore what you've heard and maybe come back with a few questions that we can go into the group discussion and Q&A with. So if that's okay, and if everyone's on the right Zoom link and Zoom event, I think we'll begin. So just on the ground rules for today, if I could ask everyone to be fully present, to make sure your videos are on. Please keep yourself on mute so that there's no background noise, but be actively listening throughout. We are recording this session and we'll be able to post that video up online for those who have been able to miss or haven't been able to make this particular session. We'd encourage you to continue the conversation at our LinkedIn website for Tricordant, and of course we'll share the slides via email and publish a reflection together with this. But first of all, I just want to touch on about what is organizational health, because maybe not everyone is really aware of it. So there's a few definitions of organizational health. Some of them focus on particular aspects. Some around competition. Being an organization, a healthy organization means that you're more competitive than others. Another definition looks at health and safety and its impact on organizational effectiveness and suggests that healthy organization has that health and safety mentality at its heart. A third one is really around the leadership team and how the leadership team creates the conditions for a healthy organization. But keeping it brief and understandable, our simple working definition of organizational health is around creating an environment where people thrive and the right thing to do is the easy thing to do. We'd like to just touch on a couple of polls just to get a sense of, from your perspective, does organizational health matter? And I'm going to ask my colleague John if he could share that poll now. And if everyone could respond to that poll, and then we get a clear view of where people are. All right, so very much everyone on the very and extremely important, does it matter? Very much definitely from your perspective. So it's great to see lots of people on side, so to speak. I love to speak to people who have a very different perspective, but let's see what they are and some of the differences in that. And could I ask John to share the next poll then, please? All right, John, do you mind sharing those results, please? So again, a really interesting spread of results there. Very much from the moderately aware all the way through to very aware and extremely aware has been the majority, but still a few people on the slightly aware. And hopefully we can share a bit more about that in a minute. Thanks, John. If you remove those, that's helpful. Thank you. So I'd like to share about why organizational health matters. And some people may have the question still, does it really, really matter? So I can give a very simple answer with a resounding yes, it does matter. But let's look at it from some different levels. Let's look at it at the organizational level, at the individual level, and then with our customers. So at the organizational level, there's two graphs that you've got up here on the screen, and there's a book written by Keller and Price called Beyond Performance. And they use a series of measures in their book to monitor the organizational performance. And what they observed is that there's a multiplier effect when both performance and organizational health improvement initiatives were implemented. So simply put, on this side, healthy organizations perform more successfully. It matters at the individual level. So Michael Marmot did an extended study over 35 years and found that inflexible work content, inflexible working patterns, lack of authority and rigid hierarchies can cause increased general morbidity. And that affected health and lifespan by up to 10 years. And I'm pretty sure that no one really wants to work for an organization that could actually shorten their lifespan by 10 years. So it very much matters at the individual level. And for the customer, well, one of the key data points around customers is around purpose and organizational purpose. And that is a key aspect of organizational health. And these two data points that I've got here, around 64% of global customers find brands that communicate their purpose more attractive. And then a second study showed that 79% of respondents said they're more loyal to their purpose brands, and 73% of that 79 said they would defend these purpose brands. So it really does matter for our customers, for us as individuals, and for the organization. It's not a nice to have nor an optional extra. It makes good business sense. Without focusing on organizational health, performance will suffer. Now, Tricordant recognizes that poorly organized work wastes money, damages people, and harms the environment too. It's one of the right reasons why we are a business for good, also known as the B Corp. If you see in the bottom left of our slides, there's a little certification there, certifying us as a B Corp. Do check them out if you'd like to at some point. I joined Tricordant back in 2006 because we have a meaningful mission, because we actively create an environment for all of us within Tricordant to thrive within, and because we do meaningful work with leaders. We like to help them to make right decisions and deliver continued success. You may be saying by now, well, that's great, but what does organizational health actually look like practically? Well, from a design lens, there are 8 aspects I'd like to share with you. First is you need to build your organization around an authentic high-level purpose. It's like that Monday morning test when you get up in the morning. You want your people to feel as if they really want to come to work, that they're going to make a significant contribution and may even change the world. The second is developing a strategy which will fulfill that purpose within the current dynamic environment. That strategy then defines the work that needs to be done to deliver your purpose. You want to organize your teams around the value creation work that contributes to your strategy. You want to empower your teams with authority, autonomy, and accountability to deliver while continuously improving. And then, of course, you need to design your structures to enable the work to be delivered, integrating across your functions and teams to align, coordinate, and avoid silos. And then, of course, embedding your learning and improvements into every role and function at every level. Lastly, you want to get the right people in the right roles, and each role has a meaningful contribution to that team and to the overall strategy. So what are some of the benefits? Well, we've already described some of those in the prior slides, but of course there's these additional benefits about meaningful work for people, greater engagement and empowerment, more efficient and effective organizations, increased agility, improved well-being. People actually want to work here. And of course, having a lesser impact on the environment, much greener overall. I'm going to ask Claudia Adriani, the business head for customer excellence at Boehringer Ingelheim, to briefly share a case study, which hopefully will put some more meat on the bones of what you've just heard, We'll then give everyone a chance to discuss what you've heard in small groups before returning to the main plenary sessions for Q&A. So Claudia, thank you so much, and take it away.
Thank you, Nick. And nice to meet you, everyone. As Nick said, my name is Claudia Adriani. I am the business head of customer excellence in BI. I joined BI actually in the summer of 18, so I'm into my second year now. And I'll give you a bit of an overview of the work that we did with Tricorder. Nick, if we can move into the next slide. So just to give you a bit of context into why we did this in the first place. So when I joined BI had been already in a journey of transformation for the previous, perhaps, year and a half to 2 years. In BI, there's a big ambition to transform the way that we engage with the customers. And that meant that 3 to 4 years ago, there was a whole program created at a global level with a very bespoke global team created for that transformation, but also smaller teams in all the different countries. I joined BI in 2018, as I said, to lead that team within the UK business. And that was a team that was meant to be driving that digital transformation in the UK. The challenge that I saw when I joined is that first we had a very cross-functional team that in itself, and it was somehow in some parts it felt like it was discreetly placed to drive a transformation, but without the proper connections with the rest of the business, and even the right connections at a purpose level, you could argue. So our objectives as a team was not necessarily like for like connected with the purpose of the business, and it wasn't clear what was the value added that we were giving to the business. So at that time, pretty much 6 months in, we had also a change in leadership in the UK, and we were given the opportunity. I particularly was asked, do you think you're set up for success? And I welcomed that question because my immediate answer was like, no, what can I do about it? And I was kind of invited to propose how we could do the things differently if we thought that that was the case. So that's how the project was started. And if we can go into the next slide, Nick. So the situation, to describe it more specifically, there was another team. As I mentioned, we were created to drive the digital transformation. We had another team that was more traditional team, which was the commercial operations and insights, that was working alongside with us, not necessarily as connected. And when we did the first analysis, actually, we found very quickly that we had lots of overlaps between the two teams, that we had lots of functions that were kind of replicated in both teams. So for example, we had an insights person in our team looking at the digital data, and we had then another team in the other side looking at the data coming from sales activities. So you could argue that that's not very customer centric and it's not very functional. We also found that these two teams, we had the same feeling of, we wanted to be more in a partnership situation with the business, but we felt that we were there mainly in a reactive way to fulfill some ad hoc requests from the business, either from data or from support with different activities. And also, and probably more important to us in terms of the discomfort that was in the two teams when we did the first analysis, when we started the project with Tricorder, we also had a very tactical approach to the way that we were working, both teams in parallel. We were quite tactical, we were quite ad hoc, we were quite like last minute sometimes these requests. So not only we were not strategic enough, but we didn't even have the time to be strategic because we were often max capacity, doing kind of firefighting across the business as opposed to be truly strategic partners to the rest of the organization. So with that in mind, then we started a project, and I will share with you in the next slide, Nick, please, the highlights of the work that we did with Tricorder, and how did it feel like to start and continue to do that project and all the way to the end. So one of the first things that I would say is we started this project, like I said, kind of in the right way. So the objective of the project was to realign the two teams or more importantly, to realign whatever parts of those teams that we needed in order to succeed and to help and support that transformation that BI was trying to achieve, which meant that we started the project in a very customer-centric approach. So this wasn't like a reshuffling of what we have and let's see how we can move things around, but we started asking the very strategic questions, and Tricordon was actually quite essential in the model that they follow and in making sure that we did so. So the very first step was actually to have a strategic guided conversation on what was the North, where do we want it to get to, what good look like when we achieve that, how our customers would feel success when we achieve that, and we were working effectively as an organization. So as I said, we did not try to fit people and reshuffle what we had, but we actually started by asking very fundamental questions. That led us into having a very strong and shared purpose between the people involved in the project. So it was important to us that we follow a purpose as a team and not necessarily just functional elements alone. We also followed a very clear structure. So one of the things that I was always amazed about the way that we were working with Tricordon, and that's our next one, if you can click, Nick, is that we had a very robust and logical framework to follow, but at any time in the project didn't feel like we were locked by it, but always it felt like it allowed us to not lose sight of the North, but we could always divert and have separate conversations if that needed to happen, and revisit things when we needed to revisit things, but we would always have a way to come back. So we had this flexible structure that allowed us to be very rich in our conversations without losing purpose and without losing the North, and more importantly, without losing the end game in the time that we had set ourselves to achieve this. And last but not least, and it felt literally like the picture that you have in the screen. Every workshop that we had, we ended up at the end of the day feeling like our brain was squeezed to the maximum. We were so mentally and intellectually tired, but amazed at the same time by the amount of work that we had done at the end of that day. So often we would walk out of the room and look at everything that was on the walls thinking, oh my God, did we really achieve all of this in one day? So really challenging, really productive time that we spent together. Then I also wanted to share with you what, in my point of view, are kind of the highlights, or what I would almost call it the critical success factors for this particular project. One of the main things, and I think this is probably the biggest one, and it's about how we engage the team in doing this. So as I said, this was something that came out of a go-ahead from the leadership, the very top of the leadership in the business. So just to mention and clarify, both my team and the COVID team, the other team that we aligned, we both reported into the general manager of the UK. So we had quite strong endorsement from the leadership. But the thing that we also did was we engaged the entire team as much as possible in this realignment. So this wasn't something that we took leadership working with consultants outside of the office or outside of the room and then went back and presented it to the team. This is the way it's going to work. We actually worked with our team, with every little team within our two departments, making sure that the thinking was represented, that when we did the analysis, we were really representing how the team felt, what was going well, what wasn't going well, but equally that we leveraged the thinking of the team in putting together the ideas on how we needed to address that to go into the future that we all wanted to go to. That, of course, as you can imagine, then renders great benefits when it comes to accountability, ownership. The whole team felt completely that this was their baby and not someone else doing this to them, but we did it all together. we also did this with the rest of the organization. So when it came to defining what value we were going to offer, this wasn't the value that we identified as the customer excellence team, but the value that we defined with our key stakeholders. So from the very beginning and the get-go, we had very strong touch points with the rest of the cross-functional leadership team and rest of the teams to make sure that we really understood also what good looks like for them, what kind of support they needed from a team like our team. If we were to achieve the north that we all defined together, then what were the critical success factors for them and not just for us? And we make sure that we incorporated that into the work and into the design of the new team. A very good thing that we did, and this is something that I hadn't done, to be honest, before, this was something that was introduced by Tricorden as part of the methodology that we use, is after every workshop, not the first one, which was more the understanding of the situation and so on, but once we started in design mode, and even the definition of the different functions of the team needed to fulfill, we invited the rest of the organization, as in the leadership team and the next level down, into what we called gallery walks. So basically, the cross-functional team was invited into our meeting room where we had been working for the entire day, for the last half an hour to 45 minutes, when they would walk around the room, and members of our own team, and as I said, this was done by the entire team, members of our own team would explain to them what the thinking was and would gather the feedback right there from them, what they thought makes sense, what they thought could be improved, if we had missed anything. So at all times along the journey, we always make sure that that value that they were expected from us was reflected in the work that we were doing. And last but not least, and Nick alluded to this in the previous part of the presentation, one thing that we actually did as well is from the beginning and more so towards the end, and this project, by the way, we finished around this late part of the summer last year, and we only completed the last mile just a few weeks ago, because for us it was very important that we focused very much in capabilities. As you can imagine, being the customer excellence team means that one of our key elements in our purpose, and one team within our team main purpose, is to drive capabilities within the organization. We want to push the organization into the next level. So it became apparent and mandatory for us that we looked after the capabilities within our team very carefully. And we needed to make sure that we had a high focus on capabilities, that we were actually placing the right people in the right jobs. So that's why at the end of August, we finished with an organization that we were all happy with, a structure with definition of roles, but we had some gaps in people that we needed to place in those roles, which meant we couldn't even complete the work on defining what capabilities we needed until we actually had the right people in place, because we took it to the extreme of looking at not just placing the right people in the right roles, but also making sure that we had the right plan to develop those people in the future, knowing that we needed to be very demanding on our own capabilities in order to deliver our ambition. So we also paid a lot of attention in the definition of each of the roles. So what Nick was talking about before, as in making sure that every role had a meaning in itself. And if you think about the power of that being done by the team itself, so every team member pretty much that we're working in the working group, and just to clarify, we're 35 people team now. We came from being 20-ish. So we grew the team by like 12 people, and pretty much at some point each of those 20 people had some input into the process, but that meant they also had some input into designing what that role in the future would look like. So pretty much they took, this is what my role does today, and some of them were involved in reviewing their own roles, and some of them were involved in reviewing their own roles, and a role that would collaborate with them to make sure that that was capturing what needed to happen in the future. So they were tasked to evolve their roles. So the level of engagement in them being able to own that new role, to own then the capability gap. And when we went into that reflection of, right, this is what the role said that should do, right? We all agree this is the case. we did even a self-assessment and assessed by other people within the organization, where do we all sit then in those capabilities, and what's the gap, and how we're going to develop that. The level of ownership that you can have of that when you actually define that future and that north, instead of someone again telling you, well, this is what you should be doing and this is what you're doing, it's been so powerful. And the level of engagement that we now have in the team, I think, is due to, in a big part, of the care that we took on these aspects, on the capabilities. And then last but not least, where are we today? And I know this has been really brief, so I wanted to allow enough time for you guys to ask me any questions that you have. Right now, I would say it's early days in our team, because as I said, we finished off, the team was officially in place on the 1st of September. We started recruiting all the new members. We had also movements within the team, so that process of redefining what all the roles would do was quite engaging as well, in terms of some people looking at development possibilities for themselves somewhere else within the same team, which was really great to see, because we had a lot of movement within the team, and we brought new people in the team. So just as of literally kind of last week, we're just one person down from the bigger plan. So we're still recruiting one individual, but we had to recruit between internal movements and then recruitment, like around 17 people. So only now we're finishing off that we can say, right, we've got the team in place, but we've been forming and norming all the way through. And I have to say, for the dimension of the team, for the amount of changes, the level of engagement from day one until now, in all the forming, the norming, the defining how we want the culture to be, because that was done obviously outside of this project and as a kickoff of the new organization, has been enormous. The engagement of the team, the ownership of the team, the willingness of the team also to achieve our ambition, because of course we all set up to achieve that, and now we're all committed to get there. We also have, very importantly, because of the level of engagement and the level of involvement that we did of the leadership team across the whole redesign process, we have heavy endorsement of the leadership of the organization. And that obviously helps, because there's a big appetite for the business to see us succeed. We are, of course, an enabler within the business, and it is important for us that we have the faith of the business and not just a constant challenge of what is it that you're doing. And the business understands also the stage that we're at, and they support us in the journey that we're in. And last, but of course, never least, the level of engagement from the rest of the business, having engaged them early on in the process, having had the buy-in from the design process onwards, has given us this partnership position that we so wanted. And I'm not resting here in my laurels that this is done. It's not. We are very much aware that this is the biggest piece in the daily wins that we need to achieve, but we do feel that we're in a very different position. We are really now acting more as partners, because the business is also clear on the value that we can add. The business is actually clear on what we're trying to achieve, and they are invested in it, so they see us in a very different light. And we are very much aware that this is something that we build on a daily basis by adding really that value, and we have clarity on that in our strategic plan, as well as in our tactical month-by-month plan. But it is great to see the change and the shift in the relationship with the business. And this has been one of the main, because this is almost like a loop, right? This has been one of the main elements that have kept the team also engaged, because that was, and Nick could potentially talk to this if he's answering any of your questions from a Tricorder point of view, but one of the biggest pain points for the team was actually that position of being a firefighter and a service team as opposed to true partners. So that has helped a lot in the engagement and the morale of the team. So that's our story. Hopefully I didn't run out of time. I think I did it actually shorter than you expected, but happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, Claudius, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. I think we're going to just pause for a moment and give everyone a chance to drop a question into chat for clarity. If you've got any questions of clarity, to just fully understand the case study, and then we can go into the small groups. So maybe just a few minutes for questions of clarity. So I'll give everyone a chance to type into chat, and if there's a number of common questions, we'll get Claudia to answer those. But if there's only 3 or 4 questions, then we'll get Claudia to answer those anyway. So the first one, it was, what was your biggest obstacle or challenge, Claudia?
Well, I have to say probably right now, well, one of the biggest challenges is always the fact that we're all humans, and at the beginning particularly, removing the mental barrier of the team of thinking the fears of, is this going to put me out of the job? What does it mean that you're changing or potentially changing my role profile? But once we clarify that that was not the intention, that we were not doing that for that reason, and that we wanted and welcomed their feedback and their input into that exactly to make it more meaningful for everyone, that kind of was easily removed. However, the thing that stayed both internally as well as external is the legacy of the thinking of what the team used to do in the past, and then reverting back into those ways of working. Those ways of working from the team point of view, as well as some of our stakeholders, some of them more than others or less than others. The whole of reverting back into like, but in the past, this is what this team did for us, hence why, how come you're not doing it anymore? Or this is the most challenging one. In the past, your team used to be this, which is, this meaning something I didn't like, and this is what they used to do. So I'm kind of cynical at what you have to offer in the future. But I think knowing what happened in the past and knowing all the gaps that the team had in the past, had we done the process in a different way and had we not engaged them as much as we did, those obstacles and those challenges will be hell much bigger than they are now. So it's very easy to revert back then to the conversations that we had together, even with these stakeholders, and make them reflect on, yes, I know that, but that's why we have discussed that this is what we're doing now, and this is what we're doing to get there, and you just need to give us time. And that's very easy to then handle when you then have that in your back pocket to manage those situations.
Another question is, how did you ensure the design was flexible and adaptable?
Well, we actually keep adapting, I have to say. So the main thing I think is we kept it always true to the north, to the purpose, and to the functions that the team needed to complete. So we actually, and I didn't talk in this detail before, but the way that it worked was we said, right, where do we want to go in the future? How good looks like for our customers? And I saw that there's a question there on, did we involve customers directly in the design? No, we didn't, but we do have in BI lots of functions that are actually customer facing. So we could have a view of what the customers were looking for, as well as all the, obviously we're constantly looking at trends as part of the roles that we have in our teams, even in the past. But we looked at what good looks like for the customers. And then we looked at also, what are those processes internally that we need to fulfill and that we need to solve for? And then hence, what are the key functions that a team needs to play a role in or needs to deliver? And that's when we started nailing down things like, we need to raise capabilities, we need to drive innovation, we need to drive customer insights, and how those functions look like in a process type of thing. So having that thinking that is very fundamental allows you to, when you're looking at the structure is just a structure to serve that. It's never a fixed structure. And if at some point we see that that structure is actually not working well, then we need to tweak it, because we need to make it work for the purpose that we set up before. So the insights team, for example, from the early design into what it is now, we have tweaked bits and pieces, because we have realized that actually maybe not. Maybe we need to put this role in place rather than put it this way, or this role actually working closer to this role rather than this other role, because otherwise it's just not fit for purpose. But the reality is you need to do that once you are actually a little bit on the new role type of function. there's also an element of you bring people from the outside, which we have done. Actually, the team is integrated today by 4 teams, well, 3 teams and 1 role. So that's kind of the leadership team of customer excellence. And 2 of those heads are external hires. So once you get them in place, also they have new ideas on how things can be done differently. And they have, within reason, reshaped a little bit their teams to make them work even better. So we continue to tweak this, and provided that, again, we're true to what we're trying to achieve. And again, because the agreement with the business has been not on a structure, but on a strategy, on a set of functions and purposes that we are trying to fulfill, then it makes it easier even to position that when any change happens in the future. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Adrian was one of the first people to put up a question, but he's waited the longest so far. So I think we probably do need to answer at least the first part of his question. You already answered the second part around were customers involved, but what informed the role design?
What informed every role design, or which role design? The role designs. Yes. So as I mentioned before, we went through the different, the key process within the business. And actually, we've based most of it in brand planning, for example, because that's mainly what how the business runs. You plan and then you execute that plan. So once we defined the different functions, then we started to look at what roles we needed to execute those functions. So it wasn't taking the initial role, because actually some roles were not the initial role. It was just a complete different role from the role we do now. And then we looked at what do this role needs to deliver in terms of the functions that is meant to be fulfilling. And what we did then later on is we went through all of the different capabilities that those roles needed to have in order to, again, fulfill that function, but equally in collaboration for all of them to achieve the ambition. So we went through a very careful process, and that was validated as well with stakeholders on each of the roles where the critical 4 to 5, well, I think the maximum that we have per role is like 6 capabilities that they needed to be, and also the levels of those capabilities in order for the roles to succeed, given what they needed to deliver. Does that answer your question? Was it Adrian asking the question? Yeah. Good.
And then Wendy is asking, Claire was asking, what cultural barriers did you face and how did you overcome them?
Yes. So one of the hardest ones, I have to say, for me has been, and it talks to the previous point I mentioned, the legacy of the people that had been in the team. Some people had been in the team for a longer time. And the challenge for those individuals has been that mindset shift between we're not a service team, we're now a partner, but equally move them from in the past, being a service team in a place where you were not comfortable, when you were getting requests that you couldn't fulfill or were put under pressure or were sometimes not appreciated by the rest of the business, creates this sort of sense of like, well, there's a culture of not think about solution, but actually think about the problem, and constantly it's like them and us. So breaking that them and us, because if you want to be a partner, then you need to stop thinking them and us. It's not them and us, it's all us and it's all the business and what's best for us. Because that's the argument, that's what we need to go out to and sell to the business and present to the business in terms of the ways of working. So moving from the victim in a way, kind of passive, I'm kind of angry at some parts of the business because the way we've been working, and being more proactive and more solution orientated has been one that we have established very clearly from the beginning in a new ways of working, and discuss as a team, and how do we do that, and what are the behaviors that we want to see, and how we're going to be supporting each other in doing that. I have to say, having people again coming from the outside is really good, because you get this fresh culture even coming in and injecting it into the rest of the team. So that has been helpful. And I would say that's probably one of the main ones. And perhaps there is this element as well of unity. This team was, and I remember in our early conversations, we had a bunch of functional clusters, as opposed to, and all of them in isolation, like, fulfilling needs of the business. We didn't have this sense of one team. And culturally also, that has led into, and this is something that we've seen more recently, and we have had to have discussions and putting things in place, even processes in place to avoid that this happens. But it's more of a cultural thing, not feeling that I'm part of a team, and this sort of defensive of, you'll constantly ask for things and then accused of not delivering in the past. This defensive thing of like, well, this is not my job, ask them. And we're trying to break this and trying to come into a culture where we're all a team, we're all in this together, we're all the face, every one of us is the face to the rest of the organization of what our team can do. And what we've done is we have communicated out to the team, this is the way that we work with you, to the business, and this is the way we work in the background. But equally, for our team, the very clear number one rule that now we have established is there's never a no to anyone that is asking for anything. It's always like, leave it with me and I'll check with the team. We are all the team. The team is all of us, and we always take whatever it takes for the team. And outside of the team, inside of the team, we can have as many open conversations that we want, and we can challenge anyone's ideas openly. But outside of our team, if we decide something, we defend that to the rest of the organization, because we're trying to add value, and it doesn't add value if we're challenging each other outside of our own team boundaries. So we take we take our little fights inside, and then outside we're a united front, both from a service point of view as well as from supporting each other. So that will be perhaps the other challenge that we have been trying to address from a culture point of view.
Thank you, that's great. I'm wondering if it's time that we go into small groups and maybe just spend about 15 minutes to think about what's resonated for you, what you'd like to hear more of, and then we can come back into plenary, and if there are things that we want to hear more of, or if there's an open discussion, we can have it then. So I'm going to set up 3 rooms, so we'll have about 4 to 5 people in per room. Of course, do your introductions again if needs be. Assign a facilitator if you don't have a tri-coordinate person in there, and then and just be clear on what are the key themes, common themes that you want to feedback about, what's resonated, and the one or few questions that you'd like to hear more about. And then we'll, when we come back into plenary, we'll hear from each of the groups. So if that's it, okay for everyone, I'm going to create the rooms and send you into them. Wonderful. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a great conversation. I certainly had a wonderful conversation in breakout room 1. I think it would be great to hear from breakout room 3 first, and then 2, and then back to 1. So could I encourage breakout room 3? Was that you, Graham? Were you the chief chef and bottle washer? You are on mute, which are, do you want to unmute yourself?
I'm pleased to say that the ever wonderful Catherine was our sort of spokesperson for the
wonderful
room.
Thank you, Catherine.
So we had a great conversation, and we were very lucky because we had Claudia in our group. So we talked about the importance of the conditions for change and the driver for it. So some of the stuff about structure, capabilities, where the business was going. The fact that was huge high-level sponsorship and commitment that was required to get the ultimate outcome, with the space to reflect and to expand the team. The fact that it was about 2 teams, and the honesty and openness there was between the 2 teams about what the outcome needed to be. The huge amount of engagement and involvement piece. So Claudia talked about not everybody was in all of the workshops, but everybody got chances to be in the workshops, and there was wide representation, and how key that was to the ownership, that everyone had a chance to be part of it. We also reflected on how fantastic it was to be absolutely true to the form follows function bit, and how tempting it is to draw a structure first, and that this also gave the time for the true cultural OD bit. Claudia talked about how good it was, how well it also fitted with the wider organisational approach about supporting individual development, and reiterated that message about this wasn't about cuts, it was about meaningful jobs for everyone, and so the way in which the team could be engaged. We were then at the end getting on to talking about in any change process, the late adopters and how you deal with that, and kind of reflecting there's still some of that in spite of the openness of the process and the ability to question and be involved all along. And then also, again, just the huge time and energy commitment of managing the change and transition whilst also still having the work to do, because it sounds like it's a really full-on piece of work, but you're all still also getting on with the day job. So, Rup, anything that you think I've missed?
Very well done.
Oh, well done, Catherine. Thank you very much. You've got the job.
Well done, yeah.
Which job would that be, Graham?
Yeah.
Well, we'll think about the role. Well done.
Yeah, well, you're fortunate enough to have Claudia in your breakout room, but was there anything that you wanted to hear more of in the plenary that Claudia didn't already answer in the breakout room?
I'd asked the question at the end before you whisked us away, Nick.
Right.
Which was that, given the inclusiveness of the process that Claudia and took the teams through, how you draw and contrast against, had she got any experience of not doing that, and it being more of a senior leadership and consultant, and then telling everybody what they're going to do. And Claudia was just starting to explain that she'd been involved in something like that. Claudia, I don't know if you just want to
I just mentioned that in the previous. So as soon as I joined BI, that same Christmas period, we had to reorg. I had to do a reorg in the organization for some reductions in some areas, and the process did feel very different. Obviously, it was a different type of process from the start, but also it was more the type of leadership led with external consultants that end up doing most of the work for you. And I was clarifying to the teams, by the way, that's not what you get with Tricorden, and it's not in a bad way. I think it's in a good way. You actually do your work. So they give you a lot of help, but your brain will get squeezed. You have to do the legwork, and the benefit of that is that then you own your thing. It's your baby. You've thought about it, and you've worked it together. So when it comes to even defending it outside later on or justifying what you've done, well, you 100% believe in it because it came from your own discussions. So, but this was a very different process. And there was a lot of different from us. So you could argue ours is more of a change. This was more of a reduction. So of course you get people that leave and people that stay, and very few people that kind of move around. There was some moving around as well. But you can feel the difference in the commitment and the engagement, even of the people that stay in a different process. So you would argue will be super happy with the new structure because you kept me. They still will question why, and I don't understand, and this doesn't make sense, and so on and so forth. So it does make a difference when you work this with a team. I'm not suggesting, by the way, that every time is possible. Obviously, if you have a company-wide type of engagement like this or restructuring, it's not always possible to include everyone. But yeah, for us, definitely it worked out much better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think there are different processes that you can utilize to engage a much wider audience. And I think as we've learned over the last few months, there is a lot to be said about remote working and virtual working and new collaborative spaces. So yeah, it may be more difficult, but it's certainly possible. So let's hear from room 2. I think, Alistair, you were in room 2, is that right?
Yeah, and I'm on the sword. So I've just put in chat some of the headline feedback. So I think the interest was engagement, and particularly how you use engagement to shift the kind of cultural legacy. We're talking about in various ways about kind of embedded ways of working, kind of habitual patterns of thinking, etc. And we had a bit of an exploration from people's own experiences of some kind of big system-led changes. So an example in Co-op of moving to a cloud-based payroll where effectively colleagues ended up accessing payroll on their own devices. And there was a workaround for 100 out of 70,000 for printed pay slips, for instance. But people didn't really have any choice. And then we talked a bit about SAP. Again, people haven't got a lot of choice. They've got limited choice. And those sorts of changes. So somehow you've got to engage people but they don't really have a choice. But they still might be a bit slow to adopt and change. But then there could be, there are things that are much more what we call an adaptive change. So a great example from Nicole of introducing AI in R&D in BI in Germany. It's like, because that starts to question who am I as a researcher if blinking AI is doing the work of trawling through the data and spotting patterns and working out what's going on. Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? So it's more of an identity question. And so the adoption issue and the engagements are a bit different. So we were beginning to explore that before the giant sword of Damocles of the breakout room closing came down. And we just noticed on the way just that people can be slow to change, but sometimes the context drives it. So COVID and NHS clinicians doing remote consulting, I guess it's the same in Germany as well, but it's an example of something that people didn't really want to change their habits, but when they had to, they did. And it's not so bad on the other side. And it's probably that's true about home working or remote working for a fair chunk of the population. There's some people for whom it's horrible. But
yeah,
so anybody true. In group 2 want to add anything else? Nicole, Claire, Adam?
That was perfect.
You're too kind.
No, thank you.
No, nothing from me either. Captured everything. Thank you.
Yeah, too good at your own job, Alistair. Yeah, so room 1, we also had an amazing conversation. I'll try and feedback some of it. Of course, my notes are not as well, or not as great as what we've already heard back from, but certainly there's a lot that resonated really well around multiple times around purpose and value and alignment, making sure those are right and the right people in the right roles. Really love the flexible structures and ability to test and evaluate on an ongoing basis and making those changes to ensure fitness for purpose. Some great tips were taken away as well, particularly around the gallery walk, ensuring that there's a real engagement with those who you're going to be working with, your immediate stakeholders, and ensuring that they feel engaged in that conversation. And that also led to a conversation around, well, how do you ensure that you get your ultimate user, your ultimate customer voice into the room as well? And we had a great conversation around that, sharing a bit around that from different sectors. And then, of course, Lego somehow made its way into the conversation. I don't know how. I blame Debbie personally, but it was great. There's nothing wrong with Lego. Love the stuff. As I was saying, I've got a couple of £1,000 worth of the stuff for use, both for org design, org development, and simulation. And Debbie was sharing about how she used Lego to simulate processes and structures. I think it was the Heathrow expansion. So great stuff. Ways of enhancing and improving your an already rigorous design process through using things like Lego and simulation. Is there anything that I missed or you want to particularly highlight? Breakout room 1, Debbie, Jagdeep and Adrian?
No, perfect.
Good.
Yes, good summary.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. So, I don't know if I heard anything else particular around what you want to explore more. If someone does want to explore something specific around the case study or maybe what I shared earlier, by all means, just unmute yourself and then ask the question or state the kind of area you want to explore more. Looks like everyone's fairly satisfied and sated with the level of input.
Nick, I have actually a question on one of your comments. and this is for you guys and in your experience or anyone in the group. So one of the things you mentioned is, yes, how the context can make you then change, and then suddenly things that became we're not, I think it was Alistair anyways, that things that were not in theory possible, then suddenly, wow, now they are, right? An example for pharma particularly would be the fact that suddenly we could have been maybe a few months, and this happened to us, in a room thinking, oh, how do we start implementing remote detailing in the primary care field force? And we ended up with a very tiny mini pilot, because that's the only thing that, well, let's start small so we don't freak people out. And then a few weeks later, everyone has to be trained, and now everyone is doing it. But I guess my question is, in your experience, when this happens, because the fear that we obviously now have is nobody knows what the future will look like. And if the future by any chance reverts into how it was in the past, how do you then prevent from the system kind of reverting back when actually now you have a different way that may not be explored enough to prove, or to be embedded, but how do you maintain that, and what do you need to do to get it right and not lose it?
I'm going to ask my team what their thoughts are, and then I'll share maybe a couple of my own thoughts.
You want me to kick off unless you're poised, John?
Yeah, go for it.
So one of the expressions that we gets used, and I used it with kind of Karen in this particular situation but kind of like, don't waste a good crisis. There's an opportunity in crisis, painful, and I mean, and if as a nation we don't flipping make something of this crisis, given the amount of pain and suffering and grief involved, then I will get quite angry amongst millions of others. So and so there are things at a societal level to shift, and there are things at an organizational level to shift. And as you said, Claudia, it's made possible things, whether that's clinicians doing remote consulting, it's your field force working differently, etc. And I'm aware that sometimes you can plan for these things. So I was involved in work in New Zealand in a hospital which was looking to change the whole culture around patient safety and relationships between managers and clinicians. And they'd been thinking about where they wanted to go and how they wanted to change. They had a crisis. They knew how to respond in a way that was consistent with the culture they wanted to shift to. And actually, it allowed and enabled a lot of shifts to happen. I mean, it's a whole story in its own right, which I have written about, and I'll write about some more, I think, shortly. But so part of it is then, how do we then lock in those beneficial gains? And I think a key organizational process is a retrospective. It's a reflection. So one of the things I'm encouraging clients to do is to say, do a reflection on what you've experienced. Help people go through a learning reflection, both to process their own emotional issues, but also to learn from what's happened through COVID. So I think a retrospective or a learning reflection cycle helps you identify learning, helps you identify things to take forward for the future. That's my kickoff.
Do you want me to have a go? Yeah. So I think often one of the failings of organisations when they look at change is they tend to look at where the change is evident, or where it can be seen. It's in the seen dimension as opposed to what's stimulating it from the hidden dimension. And often these changes fail because they're only at a singular point of the organisation. I think what a crisis can do, what we see happening now, is it forces the system into a change which addresses itself at many levels of an organisation and tends to look at a whole system, because you have to get a new whole system to work. And I think the enduring nature then is that when times get back towards where they were, you're better seeing the dynamic and the momentum of a whole system change rather than a segment of a system change. And I think in that is the health that you can then speak into and do a good comparison and justify and keep that which is good, and not see it all just completely drift back. plus the experience, because a lot of it is show and tell, and people have now experienced the new way. And what we're hearing a lot of is people saying, well, actually, even if I could, I wouldn't want to go back to that. So you've got the inertia and the momentum of people's own desire to stay more in that new place. That's.
Thank you.
John, do you want to add in anything?
Not hugely. I think maybe the one thing I would add, and it kind of builds on both what Alistair and Graham have just said. I think in these situations, it's always easy to talk about other people. And one of the things that, I'll reflect on it in a minute, but that Claudia said before that really spoke to me was about the breaking down the them and us. And part of breaking down the them and us is that we need to be very clear about our own roles and what's happening with us as individuals. So I think before we start, one of the things about the reflection and working across the system is that we really need to be clear on the impact that we are having on the system, and the impact that any crisis is having on us, and just that bit of personal reflection. That I think is, for me, is quite a significant part in all of this. But Nick, no doubt you've got much greater wisdom.
I was just checking off because I had four thoughts myself, but they've all been covered. So really, I just really want to highlight the additional piece, which talks to the earlier part of your question, Claudia. And this is much more about the thinking forward and what else could actually happen. And in the breakout room 1, we talked a bit about scenario planning and working out what are the potential futures that could impact, and therefore how do we adapt and how do you respond within that. So that's another aspect I'd speak into, that in addition to the retrospective, the self-awareness and emotional intelligence, as well as personal agency. What can I do? What can we do to actually ensure that we lock in these games and not kind of drift back into the old ways of working that maybe weren't as effective as we'd like, maybe didn't allow us to have that meaningful work that we'd want or our people didn't get. Hopefully that gives you a broad spectrum of an answer. Is there anyone else who'd like to add into that maybe we've missed something from the wider floor?
So I think there is one thing, Jagdeep and I have had conversations about this before, and it's conversations that we're having across the civil service as well, and that's about the tensions. So if you take the civil service, some parts have been impacted so dramatically and other parts haven't. And those parts that haven't are thinking about the future and where we want to go, when you've got other parts that are still in crisis mode. And it's understanding those tensions and how you work with those tensions to actually unpick everything that everybody was having here so that we move forwards in the right direction. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I think we'll move on into the last little bit just before we close. So the last bit is just reminding everyone, I actually had promised on the Eventbrite page and in our emails that we would give you access to a powerful but practical design tool. So we'd like to share the Organization Design Health Assessment tool that we've been using over many years. We've converted it into an online assessment tool. This is our minimum viable product. Now, it gives you a simple set of 12 tests to help you assess your organization design work and to ensure you're making the right decisions when designing a healthy, high-performing organization. So I will send out the link via email. If any of you are into QR codes, you can always zap it on the screen now. I invite you to try it out. Do give us some feedback about what it's like to complete it. But our gift back to you, if you complete it, is that we'll give you a standardized report for the organization that you assess. If you'd like to, by all means, share it with your peers. and then we can provide a comparative report for either your whole organization, or if you tell me which part of it, the scoped part of your organization. Just let me know in advance what you're doing and when you'll have it done by, and then I can get that standardized report out for you. Have a go at it. We promise not to utilize this data beyond writing up a report for you. And I look forward to generating those reports for you if you utilize it. So are there any questions about that? Otherwise, I think we move on into the thank you and goodbyes. Okay. So lastly, I just want to thank you so much, and particularly Claudia, thank you so much for the opportunity that we've been able to work with you and with your team for making an impact for you with your organization. And thank you so much for this case study, for your time and the insights.
No problem, my pleasure. Thank you guys for the support. I mean, I know that we just closed a project that seemed like a long time, but I did enjoy it, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Claudia. It was really, really good. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And everyone else, I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've been able to take away some tips and some ideas. And we'll get the slides and reflection out to you in a little while. But do get in touch if you've got any questions. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Nice to meet you, everyone.
Lovely. Thank you ever so much. Much appreciated.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Claudia. Thanks, guys at Tricordant. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
Adrian.
it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.